Welcome to the Touch MBA Admissions Podcast. Do you need help figuring out which schools to apply to or how to get into the world's top MBA programs? Hey, you're not alone. Join thousands of others on this podcast and on our site, touchmba.com, as they seek the admissions edge. And now, here's your host, Darren Joe.
Hey guys, welcome to the show. I hope you had a chance to listen to our last episode with Rob O'Reilly. Actually, after we finished recording that episode, I was talking to Rob, a longtime listener, about ways we could improve Touch MBA, episodes that perhaps he was looking for but couldn't find. And he actually brought up the point that he didn't remember us doing an episode on resumes, which he thought was crucial for him to get into USC Marshall MBA. And of course, the resume is a huge part of your MBA application. It's really usually the first thing that admissions officers see and kind of frames how they view the rest of your profile and application. So I thought what we could do on this episode was republish one of the earliest episodes we recorded, I believe over 5 years ago now. And that episode was on resumes. In it, I talk about the 7 deadly sins of MBA resumes. And I just listened to that episode again. And even though it's kind of hard to listen to yourself sometimes, and some of the analogies you make, you kind of cringe at, I think that all of the main points still stand, and we still encourage applicants to follow them at touchmba.com. I've also included a clip from Leigh, Gauthier, who was the acting director of MBA admissions for the University of Toronto Rotman, one of Canada's best MBA programs. She's also, the director of their career services at one point, and is basically an incredible executive coach. I wanted to share her tips as well on MBA resumes. Also, to help you, please know that we have a ton of content that we've recorded or written over the past 5 years that I encourage you all to find at our website, touchmba.com/podcast. And if you look on the right side, you can see all our episodes sorted by, for example, resume tips or recommendation tips or interview tips or essay tips or career goal tips or attention positioning tips, or my favorite, school selection tips. Our website's a great place where you can find all that content in one place without having to thumb up on your podcast app to try to find our past episodes. So please check that out. And both Leigh and I mentioned MBA templates that we encourage applicants to use. Why not use what has worked before, right? So you can find all those MBA resume templates at touchmba.com/MBA-resume-tips-templates. Or just Google MBA resume templates, Touch MBA, and you should be able to find all these templates. So I hope this is a timely episode for you and helps you prepare that very important part of your application.
In this episode, I wanted to talk about resumes because resumes are often overlooked in the application process. As a former MBA admissions officer, I've probably read over 1,000 resumes, and I can say that whenever we received a new application, the very first thing I did was to look at the resume, because it was the quickest and easiest way for me to understand someone's background and profile and quickly assess their candidacy. So what I'd like to talk about today is the 7 deadly sins of the MBA resume. So you want to avoid these 7 common mistakes when preparing your resume, so you give yourself the best chance when you apply to business school. All right, so let's talk about the first deadly sin, which is your resume is long. It's packed with words. It's 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe even 6 pages, right? You have to put yourself in the shoes of admissions officers, right? Handing them a 4-page resume is like handing them a 4-page contract that you have to read through before you sign, right? They are already going to be biased against your resume before they even take a look at it, because they're going to dread reading it. They're going to be thinking, oh man, this is going to take a long time to get through. So you want to make your resume as frictionless as possible. You want to make sure the reader has to do the least amount of work to really understand the strengths of your profile, right? So keep your resume under one page. Deadly sin number 2, it's ugly. And what I mean by this is that it's really hard on the eyes. It's hard to read. It's tiring to look at. So you can fix all these things through proper formatting. I'll put a link in the show notes to some nice looking MBA resume templates that you can see for yourself, but it might be good to remember these common rules of thumb. Okay, 1, you want to make sure that there's enough white space in your resume. So for example, keeping a 1-inch margin around the top, bottom, left, and right. Keeping space between lines so that your bullet points aren't so crowded together. Maybe putting a 3 to 4 point spacing above and between your bullet points will make it easier to read. You want to use 10 to 12 point font, and you want to be using a conservative typeface, okay? So, don't use a squiggly text or a very artsy-fartsy typeface on your resume. You want to use a font like Arial or Helvetica, Times New Roman, Calibri, Cambria on your resume, okay? So again, 10 to 12 point font, conservative typeface. Another rule of thumb is you probably don't need to list more than 4 bullet points under each of your jobs. And don't use more than 2 lines per bullet point. The point of the resume is to highlight and showcase your greatest accomplishments. Pick the 3 or 4 things where you really had impact and write those out. Okay, so again, I'll link to some sample templates in the show notes. The third deadly sin of MBA resumes is focusing on the wrong parts of your application. Just in the same way that someone who's dating, whether a guy or girl, will keep the emphasis on their best features, you need to shine the spotlight in your resume on the strongest parts of your profile. So, if you have beautiful eyes, keep the focus on the beautiful eyes. If you went to a really well-regarded and prestigious undergraduate university, make sure there's a spotlight on that. If you work for a really sexy company, shine the spotlight there. Or if you have a really unique accomplishment that you need more space to detail, that's fine. Shine the spotlight there. So 2 things to keep in mind in terms of focus. 1, you want to place your strongest material at the top of your resume. If your work experience is really the strongest part of your profile, put that first. And vice versa. If your educational background is a lot stronger than your work experience, then put your education first. Second thing to think about is what takes up the most space. And obviously, you want to use proportionally bigger spaces in your resume to emphasize your bigger and greater accomplishments. So shine the spotlight on your strengths. Let me give an example to make this more concrete. I once had a client who went to an average university and had below average grades, but worked for one of the top companies in her industry, in the water management industry, and was overseeing, real estate projects in the tens and hundred millions of dollars. But she spent the whole first half of her resume listing out her contact details, the university she went to, the classes she took, where she went to study abroad, the certificates she got. And then only further down the page, more than halfway down the page, did you get to her professional experience. Her resume and candidacy was much more impressive after we switched this around and put her work experience first. Deadly sin number 4, you submit a job resume. A job resume and an MBA resume are very different. You have to remember who you're talking to. A job resume is focused on getting a job, and oftentimes you have to show your technical skills and experience in your job resume. You can also speak the vernacular of the industry you are in, and the person reading your resume will know what you're talking about. But you have to remember that MBA admissions officers, they don't know every company in the world, and they don't know every industry in the world. So don't use technical or workplace acronyms like RFQ or SCM. You want to spell these things out and help the admissions officer understand what it is that you do and what it is that your company does. The question to keep in mind here is, what does your resume scream? Does it scream engineer? Or does it scream scientist? Does it scream accountant? Or does it scream leader? Remember that MBA resumes are not just focused on your future employability, but also on your leadership potential and your ability to create impact. So that's really what you want to show. Take out that technical jargon and show how you have impacted your organization and your community in your resume. They're looking for leadership potential. All right, the fifth deadly sin is that there's no impact shown in your resume. Now, I believe that a lot of MBA applicants undersell themselves in their resume because they don't quantify their impact. You want to make each bullet point in your resume as specific, concrete, and quantitative as possible. Okay, you want to show that you perform and that you have gotten results. All right, so let me list out a few examples by what I mean by this. One resume I got said, what is your key skill? And he wrote, leadership, simultaneous management of large number of responsibilities. What responsibilities, right? Be specific. What exactly are those responsibilities? Here's another example. I took the contest to a higher level. Well, what does higher level mean? Does this mean that you brought it to the national level? Does it mean that you raised more money, that you awarded more people? Be specific. Here's another example. I was stationed in Algeria for the short term. Well, what does short term mean? Does that mean 4 days, 4 months? The difference between 4 days and 4 months can make a world of a difference to how you're perceived by the admissions committee. Okay, here's another example. I researched and sold equity products to a variety of retail clients, breaking several company sales performance records. Wow, now that got my attention, but what sales records did you break? Be specific, be concrete, be quantitative with your accomplishments. Another common mistake, to be quantitative and list out a money amount, for example, 1 million, but not say what currency you're operating in, right? So 1 million US dollars versus 1 million Vietnamese dong is very different. I often advise my clients to use the currency of the school you're applying to. So if they're in Singapore, you can put all your currencies into Singapore dollars. Of course, the default is probably US dollars, but you want to make it as easy as possible for the reader to understand the impact that you have made at your company. Okay, so those are a couple examples where the candidate has chances to demonstrate impact, right? By being more specific, concrete, and quantitative. Okay, so every bullet point, try to make it as specific and concrete as possible and emphasize that point enough. Okay, the sixth deadly sin is that there's no context. And what I mean by this is you really need to make yourself stand out in your resume. And oftentimes to do this, you need to explain more about your company, or you need to explain more about the award you won, or more about what task you have undertaken, right? So let's look at a common mistake that candidates make is not describing who their employer is or what they do. I understand this is really counterintuitive because you're working really hard for this company. You're intimately involved in everything that's going on with the company, right? So you just assume that whoever reads your resume would know all about your employer. But you have to, again, remember that admissions officers don't know every company in the world, and very few people do for that matter. So you need to describe what is unique or special about your company. If you are Coca-Cola, McDonald's, Apple, Facebook, these huge brands, okay, you probably don't need to describe what the company does. But for most candidates, they'll need to describe a little bit about what their companies do. Okay, so have you heard of HiFlex, Global Foundries, or Shake and Go? These are 3 companies of my clients. And I didn't know about these companies either until I asked them. And what I found out was that the first is one of the largest water manufacturing companies in the world. The second is what is the second largest independent semiconductor foundry in the world. And the third is the #1 supplier of human and synthetic hair in the US. If you If you didn't include that in your resume, then the reader might think, Shake and Go. I mean, what is Shake and Go? It sounds like a fast food company, right? But if you describe that, then the person has context in their mind. Oh, wow, this person is working for, the number one player in this niche industry. That's very interesting, right? So describe, provide context for what your employer does. And, how can you make your company sound interesting? Well, you could talk about scale, like in terms of their market share, in terms of their revenues. You could talk about their standing in the industry, or you could talk about what industry they're in. Give a story behind your employer. The second area that many candidates fail to provide context with is the activities and awards section. So many times in resumes, you include the awards you've won, but make sure you describe how you stand out and why you won that award. So here's an example. One client wrote, I won an earthquake modeling competition. I'm not sure if this is like a science fair thing or a national thing or an international contest. Like if you won the competition, how many teams were competing? What country were you in? What was the award? So give me some more context to that accomplishment so that, I will be much more impressed by you. So to summarize, provide more context, make yourself stand out, which is related to the deadly sin number 7, okay, which is that your resume doesn't show any career progression. Admissions officers love to see candidates who are on the quote unquote fast track. To do this, you need to show movement. In other words, were you promoted quicker than average? Did you earn any awards? Were you ranked top 1, 2, or 3 for sales or for anything else? Did you fill a role that's normally reserved for people much older than you? If it is the case for you for any of these things, make sure that comes through in your resume. Highlight that you've been promoted twice within 3 years. And you also, whenever possible, want to show an increase of responsibilities. Now, this could be your title. You're moving from like an analyst to an associate. It could also be budget. Maybe, you were handling $100,000 marketing budget. Now you're handling $500,000 marketing budget. It could be management. So maybe you started off as an analyst or an executive, but now you're a project manager and you're looking after, 3 or 4 people or even 1 or 2 people. That's great. That shows progression in your career. You're growing, gaining more and more responsibility. So remember these 7 sins when you're preparing your resume. 1, don't make it long. Keep it under a page. 2, make it easy on the eye. 3, keep it focused on your greatest accomplishments. Devote the most space to the parts you want to highlight the most. 4, make sure it's an MBA resume and not a job resume. 5, show your impact. Quantify your impact whenever possible. Make your bullet points and your accomplishments as specific, concrete, quantitative as possible. 6, provide context to your employer and to your awards and accomplishments. Make sure you stand out. And finally, 7, show career progression whenever possible.
Hi, this is Leigh, Gauthier, Assistant Director of Recruitment Admissions at the Rotman School of Management, University of Toronto. And the question I've been asked to comment on is one action can candidates take to dramatically improve their application? Well, I'll go to my favorite, and that is the resume. I think that students spend a lot of time on perfecting every part of the application, but sometimes they forget to go deep into the resume. So there's a couple things that I'd like to share that we, and I in particular, are looking for when I'm reviewing an application file. First and foremost, Rotman offers a Rotman template on the website as a guideline. So using this template allows you to show us that you have taken the resume writing process seriously. It can put it into a format that is familiar to us and, quite frankly, the one that we use in B School when you get here. So we love to see that students have taken the effort and followed our advice before they even get here on creating a Rotman resume in the resume template provided on the web. What I would say, though, in terms of content is to make sure that it's accomplishment based. I still find today that a lot of students are writing down what they've done in terms of their responsibilities, but they're not getting to the meat of it. They're just giving us a list of tasks when really they should be writing an accomplishment-based resume that tells us, that gives us proof as to what they've done, but how well they've done it. And what we're looking for here is quantifying. As best as possible, we like you to answer the question for every bullet, how is that organization better as a result of you having been there? So what have you done? Have you grown the business? Have you had an impact with employees in training and recruiting? Have you saved money? Have you streamlined? What have you done, and how is the organization better as a result of you having been there? So yes, it takes a little bit of digging, and yes, it takes a lot more effort than creating a list of activities that you already know that you do. Go a little bit deeper, push yourself, and ask yourself, why is this organization better as a result of me being there? I can tell you that this will dramatically improve your application, because we will have a great sense of who you are and what your accomplishments are vis-a-vis your resume. This will definitely be one key to be invited into a interview, and that would be something that obviously all students want, considering that the interview is by invitation only. So go download it off the site, have some fun, push yourself. After each bullet, ask "so what?" and you'll be good to go. Have fun.
Thanks for listening to the Touch MBA podcast. Don't be shy. We have a mailing list. Go to touchmba.com and get yourself signed up. And we'll keep you posted with the best tips and insider interviews on how to get into your #1 school. You can also find us on Twitter and Facebook at Touch MBA. See you soon.